pact with the Romans. Then Judas learned of the reputation of the Romans, that they were mighty and behaved well toward all who made a pact with them. They could ensure friendship with as many as came to them, indeed, because they were of great strength. People also told him of their warfare and the courageous works they were doing in Gaul, how they conquered them and imposed taxes on them. They also reported what they had done in the country of Spain, to take control of their silver and gold mines, and how they dominated the entire region by their careful planning and forbearance, although the area was a great distance away. The Romans also defeated kings who challenged them from around the world, until they subdued them and struck a deadly blow against them. But the others paid them taxes each year. They battled and soundly conquered Philip and Perseus, kings of the Macedonians, and others who stood up against them in war. They further conquered Antiochus the great king of Asia, who went to war against them with 120 elephants and cavalry and chariots and a massive army. But his troops were destroyed by them. They captured him alive, and ordered that he and those who would rule in the future should pay large taxes, along with hostages. They also took from him the countries of India, Media, and Lydia. Then they gave some of the best of all these territories to King Eumenes. The Greeks also plotted to come against them. But this became known to the Romans, and they sent one of their generals against them. He fought with them, and many wounded fell, and the Romans took their wives and children captive. They robbed them, took their land, pulled down their fortresses, and have to this day enslaved them. They crushed and captured the remaining kingdoms and the islands, as many as would oppose them. But they secured a relationship with their friends and those people who relied on them. Thus they conquered rulers far away and nearby, as many as had heard of their reputation feared them. Those the Romans desire to help and to raise up as kings, they establish, and those kings they wish to depose they depose, for they have great power. But despite all this, none of the Romans has donned a crown or vested in purple, so as to be magnified by it. Instead they formed a council for themselves, and 320 senators constantly deliberate concerning the people, to help them behave in an orderly fashion. They trust one man to govern them for a year, and to rule over their land. Everyone heeds this one leader, and there is no jealousy or strife among them. Now Judas appointed Eupolemus the son of John, son of Achos, and Jason the son of Eleazar, and dispatched them to Rome to build friendship and an alliance, and to free their people from a yoke of bondage, because they realized the Greek kingdom was subjecting Israel to total servitude. So they journeyed to Rome, a very long trip. When they came to the Senate chamber, they said the following: Judas, also named Maccabeus, his brothers, and the Jewish people sent us here to you to build an alliance and have peace with you, that you may enlist us as your friends and allies. Terms of the alliance. The proposal pleased the Senate. So this is the copy of the message they issued in reply, inscribed on bronze tablets and sent to Jerusalem, to be kept there as a record of peace and friendship. May it be well with the Roman people, and the Jewish nation shall respond wholeheartedly as their allies, as the occasion may dictate. If war comes first to Rome or to any of their allies in all their dominion, the Judean nation shall act as their allies wholeheartedly, as the occasion may dictate to them. As to any enemy who wages war, the Jews shall not donate or supply grain, weapons, money, or ships, as Rome has stated, and they shall honor these commitments without getting anything in return. Similarly, should war break out first against the Jewish nation, the Romans shall freely respond as their allies, as is appropriate for them. Further, no grain, weapons, money, or ships will be given to allies of the enemy, as Rome has decided, and they shall hold to these obligations and do so with no deception. Thus the Romans offer a treaty with the Jews on these terms. If after these agreements take effect, both parties should decide to add or subtract anything, they shall do so by agreement, and whatever they add or subtract shall be binding. Now regarding the evils Demetrius the king is doing to them, we have sent to him this word: if therefore they appeal to us against you again, we will defend their rights and oppose you, be it on the sea or on land. Judas dies in battle. Now Demetrius got word that Nicanor and his men had fallen in battle, so he authorized Bacchides and Alcimus to go a second time into the land of Judah and take the right hand flank of the army with them. Thus they traveled the highway into Gilgal and camped at Masaloth in Arbela. They captured it, and many people died. Then in the first month of the 152nd year, they encamped opposite Jerusalem. But they departed there and went to Berea, 20,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 cavalry with them. Now Judah set up camp in Elasa, and 3,000 chosen men accompanied him. When they saw how large the number of the enemy forces was, they were very afraid, and many sneaked out of the camp. Just 800 men remained among them. When Judas realized his troops had run away and the battle was pressing upon him, he was greatly discouraged and had no time to rally them. Though weary, he said to those who remained, "Let us arise and move out against our enemies. We may yet be able to fight them." But they kept trying to turn him back, saying, "We are not able. Let us rather save our lives now. Let us return with our brothers and fight against them later, for we are too few." But Judas answered, "May it be far from us to do such a thing, to run away from them. If our time has come to die, then let us die courageously for the sake of our people. We will not leave behind a charge against our honor." Then the forces of Bacchides moved out from the camp in formation and stood to encounter them. The mounted troops were divided into two parts, and the sling throwers and the archers advanced before the army, along with all the chief warriors. Bacchides was on the right flank. Then the phalanx drew near between the companies on both sides and sounded their trumpets. The army of Judas also blew its trumpets. The ground shook by the clamor of the troops, and the battle raged on from morning until nightfall. Judas realized that Bacchides had the strength of his forces on the right flank. So all the stout-hearted men came together with Judas. They demolished the right flank, and pursued Bacchides' men all the way to Mount Azotus. When those on the left flank saw that the right flank was broken, they reversed course and followed closely behind the army of Judas. The battle was fierce, and many men on both sides suffered wounds and fell. Judas also fell, and his men fled. Jonathan and Simon took Judas their brother and buried him in the tomb of his fathers in Modin. They wept for him, and all Israel mourned him with great lamentation for many days, saying, "How the mighty is fallen, Israel's Savior." Now the abundant acts of Judas, his wars, the brave things he did, and his greatness, are not recorded, for there were far too many. Jonathan succeeds his brother. After Judas's death, the lawless emerged in all the regions of Israel, and all those rose up who worked evil. In those days, there was a very great famine, and the nation deserted with the evildoers to Bacchides. He chose godless men and appointed them lords of the country. These men sought out and searched for the allies of Judas, bringing them to Bacchides. He took vengeance on them and mocked them. There was great perplexity in Israel, such as had not been seen since the days when the prophets ceased to be seen in their midst. Then all of Judas's friends came together and spoke to Jonathan. "Since your brother Judas died, a man like him has not come out to take on our enemies, namely Bacchides and those from our country who hate us. Therefore, we have now chosen you this day to replace him as our ruler and be our leader in battle. So Jonathan accepted the command at once and rose up in the place of Judas his brother. Notes from the previous page. 8:1-16 Polybius, c. 160 BC, claimed that by his time the Romans had cleared the people of Gaul, Celtic migrants, from the Po Valley up to the Alps. Rome then assumed the domain of Alexander the Great following their victory over Philip of Macedonia, v5, at Cynoscephaly in 197 BC, and his son Perseus at Pydna in 168 BC. Under Scipio, the Romans took Spain from the Carthaginians after the Second Punic War, 202 BC, and the final defeat of Hannibal. Jonathan takes on Bacchides. When Bacchides heard this, he sought to kill him. But Jonathan, Simon his brother, and everyone with him knew of this, and they escaped to the desert of Tekoa and camped near the waters of the pool of Asphar. Bacchides discovered this on the Sabbath, and he and his army all crossed over the Jordan. So Jonathan sent John his brother as leader of the people, and he begged his Nabatean friends for approval to store their huge amount of baggage with them. But the sons of Jamri from Medba came out and seized John, and left with everything he had. After these things happened, they told Jonathan and his brother Simon, saying, The sons of Jamri are holding a great marriage feast, and they are bringing the bride from Nodabath, a daughter of one of the great noblemen of Canaan, with a huge convoy. They remembered the blood of John their brother, and went up and hid under the cover of the mountain. They raised their eyes and looked, and behold, there was a noisy crowd coming with much baggage. The bridegroom also came forth with his friends and brothers to meet them with tambourines, the musicians, and many weapons. Jonathan's men rose up against them from an ambush and killed them. Many of the wounded also fell, and the rest fled to the mountain. So they took all their spoils. The wedding was changed to mourning, and the sound of the musicians became like a dirge. Thus they avenged their brothers' blood and returned to the low ground of the Jordan. Bacchides then heard of this and arrived with a large army on the Sabbath at the banks of the Jordan. So Jonathan said to those with him, Let us stand and fight for our lives, for today is not as yesterday or the day before. Behold, the battle is before us and behind us. The water of the Jordan is on this side and that, and the low ground and thicket is not the place to turn aside. Now therefore, cry out to heaven that you may be saved from the hand of our adversaries. So the battle was joined, and Jonathan reached out his hand to strike Bacchides, who ducked aside and went behind him. Then Jonathan and his forces jumped into the Jordan River, swimming to the other side. Bacchides and his army did not cross over the Jordan to strike them. About 1,000 of Bacchides' soldiers fell on that day. Bacchides then returned to Jerusalem and built fortified cities in Judea. The fortresses were in Jericho, and in Emmaus, Beth-horon, Bethel, Timnath, Pharathon and Tephon, all with high walls, gates, and bars. He also placed a guard in them, and they were hostile to Israel. Then he strengthened the cities of Beth-zur and Gezerah, and the citadel, and placed armies in them with stores of provisions. He also seized the sons of the rulers of the area, holding them hostage under armed guards at the citadel in Jerusalem. Attempted destruction at the temple. Then in the 153rd year, in the second month, Alcimus issued the command to take down the wall of the inner court of the sanctuary. Then he took down the work of the prophets and started to destroy it. At that instant, Alcimus was stricken, his mischief was thwarted, his mouth was shut up, and he became paralyzed. He could not even speak a word so as to give orders concerning his property. So Alcimus died then and there, in great pain. When Bacchides saw that Alcimus had died, he returned to King Demetrius. Thus the land of Judah was peaceful for 2 years. Soon, all the lawless men deliberated among themselves, saying, Behold, Jonathan and those with him are living in peace and certitude. Now, therefore, let us bring Bacchides back here, and he will seize them all in one night. So they went and conversed with him, and he departed to come with a large army, secretly sending letters to all his allies in Judea, telling them to capture Jonathan and those with him. But they could not do so, because their plot had been discovered. So Jonathan and his men caught about 50 of their countrymen, who were the leaders of the agitation, and killed them. Bacchides' forces are crushed. Then Jonathan, Simon, and those with them departed for Bethbasi in the desert, and rebuilt the outpost that had been destroyed and strengthened it. When Bacchides heard of this, he gathered all his army and sent orders to the men of Judea. Then he arrived and camped at Bethbasi and attacked it for many days, making engines of war. But Jonathan left Simon his brother in the city, and headed out into the country with a handful of men. He struck Odomara and his brothers and the sons of Phozirn inside their tents. Then he launched his attack and entered into battle with his armies. Meanwhile Simon and those with him came out of the city and set on fire the engines of war. Once they took the offensive against Bacchides, he was crushed by them. They upset him greatly because his plan of attack was in vain. Also, he was filled with rage at his advisers, the lawless men, who urged him to come into the country. So he killed many of them and then decided to return home. When Jonathan learned of these events, he sent envoys to make peace with Bacchides, and to obtain freedom for the captives. Bacchides accepted the proposal and swore to Jonathan he would not harm him all the days of his life. He returned to him the hostages taken earlier from the land of Judah. Then he returned to his homeland and made no further attempt to come into their country. Thus the sword was laid down in Israel. Then Jonathan settled down in Michmash, where he began to judge the people and to destroy the ungodly men of Israel. Alexander appoints Jonathan high priest. Then in the 160th year, Alexander, the son of Antiochus Epiphanes, went forth and conquered Ptolemy. They made him welcome, and he reigned there. But when Demetrius the king learned this, he gathered a huge army and went out to battle him. Demetrius also sent a letter to Jonathan with peaceful words to flatter him. For he said, Let us act with foresight to make peace with him before he sides with Alexander against us. For he will recall the evils we carried out against him, and against his brothers and his nation. So the king gave authority to Jonathan to assemble an army, prepare weapons, and be his ally. He also ordered the hostages in the citadel to be released to him. Then Jonathan entered Jerusalem and read the letter in the presence of all the people and those in the citadel. They were very frightened when they heard the king had given Jonathan authorization to assemble an army. So the men in the citadel returned the hostages to Jonathan, and he brought them back to their parents. Soon, Jonathan settled in Jerusalem and began to reconstruct the city. He also told the workers to build the walls to surround Mount Zion with square-cut stones for fortification, which they did. Then the foreigners who had been in their fortresses built by Bacchides fled. Each one left his place and departed into his own land. Only some in Beth-zur who had forsaken the law and the commandments remained, for it was a place of refuge. When King Alexander heard about the proposals Demetrius had sent to Jonathan, and was told about the battles and the courageous deeds done by Jonathan and his brothers, as well as what they had suffered, He said, "Where will we find another like this man? Let us make him our friend and our ally." So he wrote a letter and sent it to him, saying, "Alexander the king to Jonathan his brother, greetings. We have heard you are a mighty warrior and suitable to be our friend. So now we appoint you today as high priest of your people and command that you be called a friend of the king." He also sent him a purple robe and a golden crown. "We ask you to agree with our interests and maintain friendship with us." So Jonathan, in the 7th month of the 160th year, put on the holy robe at the Feast of Tabernacles. Then he gathered an army and stockpiled many weapons. Notes from the previous page. 9:2830 The Jews elected Jonathan as their new military leader in 159 BC. When Bacchides found out about the election, he tried to have Jonathan assassinated, v. 32. When that failed, he marched after the Jews on the Sabbath, thinking that he would take them by surprise, v. 34. 935-42 One of the remaining brothers, John, was killed by the sons of Jamri, apparently a local tribe, while journeying to the Nabateans in the Transjordan, Josephus. 954 The wall of the inner court of the temple had multiple functions. First, it separated the priests from the laity. Secondly, it divided the men from the women. Lastly, and most importantly, it kept Gentiles from entering the sacred areas of the temple. 9:71 Bacchides finally realized that the Maccabees were the controlling force in Judean politics, so he made peace with them. Demetrius I writes to Jonathan. When Demetrius heard these reports, he was disturbed and said, "What is this that we have done? Alexander has upstaged us by forming a friendship with the Jews for support. I also will write them words of encouragement and promise them glory and gifts, that they may be my support." So he sent them the following message. King Demetrius to the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since you have kept your agreements with us and maintained our friendship, and have not sided with our enemies, we have learned of this and rejoice. Even now, do continue to keep faith with us, and we will repay you good things for your deeds. We will grant you many prerogatives and give you gifts. At this time I am releasing and exempting all Jews from tribute and salt taxes and from crown levies. Furthermore, instead of handing over to me a third of the harvest and half of the fruit of the trees, which I am due, I cancel them from this day forward and beyond. I will not extract them from those of Judah, nor from the 3 provinces annexed to them from Samaria and Galilee from now on. In addition, let Jerusalem and her vicinities be set apart and released from tithes and taxes. I am also releasing my control of the citadel in Jerusalem, and I give it to the high priest, that he may place men in it whom he himself chooses to guard it. So every soul of the Jews taken captive from the land of Judah into all my kingdom I release freely without payment. Let all officials also cancel the duties on their livestock. Moreover, all the feasts, the Sabbaths, the new moons, the appointed days, as well as the 3 days prior to the feast and 3 after the feast, let all these days be established as exempt and released for the Jews in my kingdom. No one will have the power to exact anything from them or to trouble any of them about anything. Let the number of Jews in the army of the king be limited to 30,000 men, and let the stipend that is due to all the troops of the king be paid to them. Some of them are to be established in the great fortresses of the king, and some are to be set in positions of trust wherever the kingdom has need. Let their officers and leaders be taken from them, and let them live by their own laws, as the king commanded in the land of Judah. As for the 3 provinces added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them be considered as one, so it may not be subject to any other authority than the high priest. I have given Ptolemy and the land adjoining it as gifts to the sanctuary in Jerusalem, for regular expenses in the sanctuary. I also grant 15,000 silver shekels yearly out of the king's revenues from the appropriate places. Even all the surplus the officials did not pay as in the first years, from now on they will give for the works of the temple. Moreover, the 5,000 shekels of silver which the officials received every year from the incomes of the sanctuary, these are also cancelled, because they belong to the priests who minister there. Further, whoever takes refuge at the temple in Jerusalem or in any of its vicinities because he owes a royal payment or any debt, let him be released and receive back all his property in my kingdom. The expense of rebuilding and restoring the structures of the sanctuary is also to be paid from the king's revenue. Then too, the expenses of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and the fortifications around it are to be paid from the king's revenue, and also the rebuilding of the walls in Judea. Offer rejected, Demetrius killed. But when Jonathan and the people heard these words, they did not believe or accept them, because they remembered the great wrongs Demetrius had done in Israel and how badly he had afflicted them. So they favored Alexander, because he was the first to offer peaceable words to them, therefore, they remained allied with him all his days. Now King Alexander assembled a large army and took position opposite Demetrius. The two kings met in battle, and the army of Demetrius fled. Alexander took pursuit and defeated them. He fought very hard until sunset, and Demetrius fell on that day. Alexander weds Cleopatra. Then Alexander sent envoys to Ptolemy the king of Egypt with the following message. Since I returned to my kingdom and have taken the throne of my fathers and established my rule, for I defeated Demetrius and secured control of my country, I faced him in war and he and his forces were destroyed by us, and we indeed have sat down upon the throne of his kingdom. Now let us build a friendship with each other. Give me your daughter in marriage, and I will become your son-in-law. I will give you gifts worthy of both you and her. Then Ptolemy the king answered, saying, It was a good day when you went back to your father's homeland and occupied the throne of their kingdom. Now I will do for you what you requested, so meet me at Ptolemy, that we might see each other, and I will be your father-in-law, as you asked. Then Ptolemy left Egypt along with his daughter Cleopatra, and reached Ptolemy in the 162nd year. 58 King Alexander met him there, and Ptolemy gave him his daughter Cleopatra in marriage. He celebrated her wedding in Ptolemy with great pageantry, in royal manner. Jonathan made governor. Then King Alexander wrote for Jonathan to meet him. So he journeyed with splendor to Ptolemy, and there met the two monarchs. He offered them silver and gold, and gave their friends numerous gifts. Thus he found favor with them. Then some troublemakers from Israel, lawless men, also gathered against Jonathan to accuse him, but the king paid no attention to them. The king then gave command to remove Jonathan's clothes and robe him in purple, and they did. Then the king seated him with himself and said to his leaders, Go out with him into the midst of the city and proclaim that no one should accuse him concerning any matter, and let no one trouble him for any cause. So it was that when his accusers saw the honor given him according to the proclamation, and saw him robed in purple, they fled. Thus the king honored him and inscribed him among his close friends. He also appointed him general and provincial governor. Then Jonathan departed to Jerusalem with peace and gladness of heart. Demetrius too appoints Apollonius. Now in the 165th year, Demetrius, the son of Demetrius, travelled from Crete to the land of his fathers. When King Alexander heard it, he was very distressed. and went back to Antioch. Then Demetrius appointed Apollonius governor of Coele-Syria. Apollonius gathered a large army and marched against Jamnia. He sent word to Jonathan the high priest, saying, "You alone rose up against us, but I was ridiculed and disgraced because of you. Why do you maintain authority over us in the hill country? Now therefore, if you trust in your army, come down against us in the plain, and let us judge together for ourselves there, for I have an army of the cities. Inquire and learn who I am, and the others who help us. They tell us there is no place for your foot to stand before us, because your fathers were put to flight twice in their land. Even now, you shall not be able to withstand such a cavalry and army in the plain, where there is neither stone nor pebble nor any place to flee." Jonathan defeats Apollonius. But when Jonathan heard the words of Apollonius, he was moved to action. He chose 10,000 men and departed from Jerusalem, and his brother Simon joined to help him. He took up a position at Joppa, but the men of that city shut its gates, for Apollonius had a band of soldiers in Joppa. So Jonathan attacked them. Then the men of Joppa became fearful, and opened the gates, and Jonathan captured Joppa. When Apollonius got word of it, he gathered 3,000 cavalry and a sizable army, and marched into Azotus, as though he were going beyond. But he went ahead into the plain, since he had a large cavalry and trusted in it. Jonathan chased him to Azotus, and there the armies joined in battle. But Apollonius secretly had left 1,000 cavalry behind. Jonathan discovered there was an ambush behind him, for they encircled his army and shot arrows at his troops from morning till sundown. But his army stood their ground, as Jonathan had ordered, and their cavalry grew tired. Then Simon brought in his army and confronted the phalanx in battle, for the cavalry had grown tired, and they were crushed by him and fled. When the cavalry was scattered on the plain, they retreated to Azotus, entering Beth Dagon, their pagan temple, to hide. 84 Then Jonathan set Azotus and the surrounding cities on fire and took spoils from them. The temple of Dagon and those who took refuge in it were burned up in the fire. So 8,000 men fell by the sword along with those who were killed by the fire. Then Jonathan left there and camped opposite Ashkelon, and the men of the city came out with great ceremony to meet him. Jonathan and the men with him later went back to Jerusalem with many spoils. Thus when King Alexander heard these reports, he proceeded to honor Jonathan again. So he sent him a golden buckle, as was customary to give to the relatives of kings. He also gave to him Ekron and all its regions as his possession.